Are you experiencing back pain that you can't get rid of? Getting migraines, vertigo, having trouble sleeping, and/or brain fog? Do you feel like your medical doctor doesn't understand your condition? Blair Chiropractic might be the solution you've been looking for. If you've ever been skeptical about this, the two doctors you're about to listen to were even more skeptical than you were when they looked into chiropractic work. But fear not. Get expert guidance from the blonde and the bald, Doctors Beth Bagley and Frederick Schurger. These two doctors have extensive experience beyond the healthcare realm and bringing unique vision and healing to their patients. What do you have when you get a biological analyst and an engineer together? Find out right here on another episode of The Blonde and the Bald. Welcome your hosts, Doctors Bagley and Schurger.
Welcome, folks, to The Blonde and the Bald. I'm Dr. Frederick Schurger.
I'm Dr. Beth Bagley. It has been a fun week here in the office. What about you?
It's been good. It's been good. I'm not liking my lighting. I think I got a yellow light here and a white light there. And
Yeah, I'm pretty mad about it. I've been thinking about that and how awful your lighting is.
I will pack the lights that I got for you, so that you have better lighting in your office. For the podcast.
It'll just look so good. Everybody's been complaining. All the comments have been how my lighting is so bad.
Exactly. And I've read this is why we don't read the comments.
So you mentioned to me what you want to do the podcast on, and I immediately was like, yes, I would love to do this. And
yes, because it's so topical. Folks, to start off with, we are not getting political. This is not a political podcast, though.
There's some political things that are going to be said in this podcast. But
there are some. They can come off as political, but they're not. But they shouldn't be political. These are things.
It really shouldn't be. This is for every person. This is for every American, and the stuff that's affecting the world. Really, every person in the world.
Exactly, and that's why we're going to discuss this because it's topical. It is. Yeah. By the time this podcast comes out, the cycle will have probably run, and this will be a little bit old hat. But if you have not gone and listened to both this podcast, well, two podcasts and a speech, then you're missing out.
You can read the speech because it is sometimes hard to understand RFK Jr.
True. But let's sort of put it in perspective. So we are on, we're recording this on October 29th right now.
It might not be October though.
No, you're right. August 29th. Oh, it would be much cooler if it was October 29th.
It would be wonderful because it was 96 today.
But one of the things, so by this point in time, I think, what is it, a week now, RFK has dropped out of the swing state races and thrown his support behind President Trump. Again, not political, just stating facts. You had noted just some of the things he was saying during his speech. And I listened to it afterwards, and I thought it was a good speech. But his point was he got into this race because he sees the really pharmaceuticals and medical industrial complex
and big food, big ag
food are really destroying the health of our country. He cited a number. Oh my goodness, it was the wrong number. He said 50%. Was it 50% of Americans have a chronic disease?
I think he said it was more than it was 2 out of 3. I wrote it down.
But there was this 50% number he threw out,
and people were saying that was wrong.
Well, he was fact checked because it's only 47%. Oh no, it was
for
funding.
God's sakes!
It was funding for pharmaceutical research, and he said 50% of the funding comes for pharmaceutical and FDA stuff comes from the food industry. As far as, supporting, the dollars come in. And the number is actually 47%. So folks, Robert F. Kennedy, right?
Yep, Bobby.
Bobby, yeah, I got to remember where we're at on these guys because JFKs and RFKs and juniors. Anyways, but he was wrong by 3%.
So let's cancel him.
Yeah.
So speaking of canceling, the first things he was going over in this speech were about censorship, really, and not just censorship from big media, which is a huge problem. And even during his speech, he was censored. And how that happened is CNN. I think they cut in when he started talking about some of the stuff that's a little uncomfortable. some truth that they
Yeah.
didn't want to hear. They cut in and said, we'll go back to this and we'll give you the synopsis. Let's talk about something else. Look over here. And I was like, you jerk. But fortunately, you can find it. And like, I just typed in RFK Jr. address and the date, and I wanted a transcript. And there's many transcripts of it online, so you can read it. But he was censored, himself was censored in the media, and he was censored by the DNC. Fortunately, he did say the RNC was not censoring him that much.
No,
they weren't working against him to try to get him out. I'm not saying the Republicans are better or anything.
Right. And we're not talking about censoring. Is two sides to it. One is the DNC RNC censorship that you're describing is actually lawfare to keep him off the ballot in certain states. Whereas then there is the other side of it where you've got censorship where they really wouldn't let him speak on any of the major newscasts.
Yeah. So
over the past 18 months that he's actually 16, 18, somewhere about that.
And he had at some points had 20% of some of the vote. So he was definitely a contender. So in 1992, Ross Perot gave 34 interviews on mainstream networks. In contrast, during the 16 months since I've declared all the majors, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN combined gave only 2 live interviews for me. And then they ran a continuous deluge of hit pieces with inaccurate, vile, terrible things to say about them. So now here's where it gets into the censorship. There is where we as healthcare practitioners, we have to go out of our way to find information.
Correct.
And the reason is because much of the information is censored that we need to make good healthcare decisions and help our patients make good healthcare decisions. So what he's feeling is all the stuff that we feel all day long, trying to get the information we need. Yeah. Now he was getting it like directly, where we just see that we can't get information.
Yeah, and we can't share our information as readily as we would like.
No, I'm afraid to share sometimes because we'll get canceled.
Yeah, and when we start saying we could get canceled, we are describing a situation where our state boards decide what we're saying isn't the way they want it presented.
Yep. Or a social media platform that we've worked with for a long time says, you can't post here anymore because you said something angry about some company that is trying to kill people and poison people, but you're not allowed to say that.
Yes.
Even though it's true.
And the other thing that's interesting that's going on right now, again, this is August 29th that this is happening. Not only is the CEO of Telegram being held in France for not turning over, effectively Telegram, a backdoor for the government to get into Telegram. Telegram is one of the few end-to-end encryption services that is not, as far as we can tell, compromised by any of the governments at this point in time, because they are trying to get him. And effectively, they have charged this CEO. I'm not even exactly sure what they've charged him with, but he's not allowed to leave the country of France. And he is also a dual citizenship between
Russia.
He might be Russian, but I think his current citizenship is France and UAE. And one of the princes down there is a good friend of his. So there's some real question marks going on there. That's happening in France. In Brazil, Twitter or X is effectively being shut down because Elon Musk will not comply with their demands for censorship. So what we don't realize is how bad censorship is until the noose is around our neck.
Well, what about hate speech, Doctor? What about hate speech? I don't want to see hate speech on my platforms. I don't want to be offended.
How do you know what is one person's hate versus another's? And this is
when is hate legitimate? I mean, at some point, we should be able to say this politician is awful and they should not be in power. Like, we should be able to say stuff like that. And
that is the founding intent of the First Amendment in the US, but not all countries have a First Amendment like what we do. And we barely have it when we look at what the news media and the social media companies are trying to sort of dial back. There is now evidence coming out that, they should not have said ivermectin was a
that's all over the press
horsewormer
right
and
now.
all of that stuff. So there's a lot, the lawyers are saying we had to do it just to bend the narrative to what was going on in the world at the time. So again, be mindful as you're listening and you're watching your stuff and consuming news. The censorship exists, and sometimes the censorship is self-imposed on people because they don't feel comfortable enough to say the truth.
And
Bobby
I think
Kennedy,
that's so true, is that people we self-censor. And obviously we should have some sort of filter.
Right.
We shouldn't say every single thing that comes through our brain. But when it's, during all the COVID stuff, there were things I wanted to say. There were things I wanted to scream.
Yeah.
I didn't. And I, maybe when I cross over and meet God, he'll be like, should have done that. And I'll be like, yeah, I probably should have.
Oddly enough, that's a conversation that I've been having with a couple of people recently. One gentleman who realized, oh, doc, when I'm out of adjustment, it's back. It's bad. It's fast. We need to get this really cleaned up. So, he realized he needed to start care opposed to, I'll get a visit here and there. For him, he needed the full thing. But, I had another buddy, we both talked, and it's like, he's like hammering it home that his friend who started care with me needed to get in here. And we both made the comment, we both know people who died because we didn't get them the care they needed, and then they had an accident or something like that. So yeah, sometimes we have to be a little bit harder, but sometimes we also have to realize we have to be able to fight another day.
Yes. And that's self-preservation is good and can be bad.
Yes. And maybe we let someone like Eric Naputi. Is that
that's him.
I mean, he went hard, and I think he's coming out on the other end okay.
I think he might have won a couple lawsuits actually.
Right.
Which I hope he did, because he really did.
And it's he was citing literature, but
so we've talked a lot on the podcast about chronic diseases and different ones in particular. What RFK did at the end of his speech was talk about how he wanted to save kids and help. What did he say? We need to love our kids more than we hate each other.
Yes.
Which was like, it just,
in fact,
and it was incredible.
Yeah. I've got people who are lifelong Democrats who are like, I can get behind that sentiment.
Yes. And so he cited some to try to prove people just don't realize how sick kids are.
Yeah.
And they know a lot of sick kids, but they don't realize how many kids are sick. So many kids are on chronic illness diseases and have diabetes and prediabetes and just tons of autoimmune issues. He said a typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his entire entire 40 to 50 year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks into his office is diabetic or pre-diabetic.
Yep.
And the mitochondrial disorders that cause diabetes also cause Alzheimer's, which is now classified as diabetes. So he's talking about type 3 diabetes,
correct,
which is really interesting, as we've talked about that. And it's costing this country more than our military budget every year. This has been an explosion of neurological illnesses that I never saw as a kid. ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, Asperger's, autism. In the year 2000, the autism rate was 1 in 1,500. Now autism rates are kids 1 in 36, according to the CDC. Nobody's talking about how 1 in every 22 kids in California has autism.
Yep.
77% of our kids are too disabled to serve in the United States military. They couldn't even pass the exams.
Yep.
Or to get in the test. So he's citing fact. Nobody wants to, CNN turns it off. Nobody wants to hear this.
Because they can't argue it. They can't, they can't spin it.
Yeah. So I liked how he turned it around. It's like, what's happening? And he cites 2 things. We could list many things under there, but he cites 2 things that he thinks are causing this. And he goes, 70% of American child's diet is ultra processed, which means industrial manufactured food.
Yep.
So our food that used to be like eggs and butter and milk and fresh bread, even, like bread can be part of it, but you made it, or your grandma made it, somebody made it. You would have food that was made.
It would mold.
Yeah, it would mold. It would mold, right? So things that don't last forever. They're not in wrappers.
And speaking of a wrappered thing, I was joking with somebody. She had to pick up her 4-year-old. She was babysitting, and I'm like, and she says, I gotta, she just got, this is a 80-year-old woman babysitting her 4-year-old grandbaby, and she was joking how she just got back from out of town. She needs to go shopping, but was informed this morning at 6 a.m. she's babysitting today. And I'm like, what is grandma buying? Because I know what my grandparents bought for me when I would go over and visit them. And that freezer was full of ho-hos and Twinkies. And the freezer, that was the best way to have a ho-ho back in the day. But that ho-ho is still sticking with me, and I'm trying to get rid of it. And the one that my nieces and nephews that my brother complains about that they do is they will get the drumsticks out. Have you seen the videos about melted drumsticks yet?
I don't want to because I think they're delicious.
I know.
No. But they don't melt, do they? No.
They would actually take one out. They'd put it in a bowl or some dish, and they'd let it melt overnight.
Oh, no.
When they broke over the chocolate top or whatever it was,
gross.
No, it was solid.
Ew.
It's like some weird texture.
Chemical. It's chemical.
Marshmallow substance.
Chemical.
It is. It's totally chemical. And when you ice cream, if you have ice cream in a cone and you leave it out, even the soft serve stuff, which we both know
absolutely melt.
It's horrible. That stuff will melt.
Because it is real food to an extent, right?
It's more real.
It's more real.
But whatever they're doing with this stuff now is so bad and so mixed up that it does not turn into a puddle like you would expect it to.
And
it's not
I can imagine. Okay, I can imagine why manufacturers would want to do this. Is because you're taking it from the store where it's in the freezer, transporting it in your cart, and then in a bag in your car, and all the way home.
Getting it to the store and onto the shelves.
So what that does is that it can freeze and unfreeze without losing its
texture.
Yes. And that's disgusting. So wonderful. So he said these foods consist primarily of, I just lost my spot. Ultra processed sugars, ultra processed grains, and seed oils. So things that we've been talking about. Whenever he was talking, I was like, I could hear it. Laboratory scientists, many of whom formerly worked for the cigarette industry, which purchased all of big food companies in the 1970s and 80s, deployed thousands of scientists to invent new chemicals to make the food more addictive. And these ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago. They didn't exist 30 years ago. Humans biologically are not able to adapt to eat them. Hundreds of chemicals are now banned in Europe, but they're just all in our food. American food is the most toxic, disgusting. Well, food. I'm going to put food. It's food. It's food-like substances.
Yeah,
it's
with
not
air quotes. Yeah. In fact, I saw something interesting that German Fanta. If you see a bottle of German Fanta, it is more of this yellowy drink because it cannot have all the extra food
colors. Yeah, which we just did a podcast on that.
Yeah, so that brings all those oranges and because of those reds, that the red food dyes, the yellow food dyes to make that super bright orange. They don't have that in Europe.
Yeah,
so it's a problem.
And then he said the second culprit is toxic chemicals in our medicine, in our environment, pesticides, food additives, pharmaceutical drugs, toxic waste. Like we've talked about is the Roundup that's in everybody's blood. And it's an assault on our children's cells. I mean, he was talking about children. It's on all of us, but the children he knows he can help, right?
Right.
He can, some of us are just.
We're doomed.
We're doomed. We're going to get
adults, sick. We have done most of our stuff. We'll keep on putting heads on straight, but we had good, we had good childhoods. We had these good years coming up where we didn't have to worry about going to the doctor once a quarter to figure out, all right, Johnny's infection is back again. What do we need to do?
And then he's got the eczema and he's got asthma and he's got, but it's fine because there's pills for all of that. It's great.
Exactly.
And guess who makes the money when there's pills for that?
Big
Pharma. So it's this revolving door. And that's what he went into later of the revolving door and the FDA, the CDC, and the government, and then the big companies. And they just go around and around and around. And one person scratches the next person's back. Well, then they get this. And it's just, it's disgusting and it's got to stop. And I do believe that he can help. And I'm so excited that he is going to join our next president, I hope, in the fight for this. The thing about it is, so many of us are on board with what he's saying that I don't think he could get backstabbed at this point.
Sure.
Because he would just go and say, y'all, this is what's happening. And we would be like, we're going to start protesting because this has to change.
Yeah.
And knowing that, and I think RFK Jr. is highly intelligent. And do I agree with all his politics? Absolutely not. I don't agree with all of Trump's politics. I don't agree with your politics. I have my own political beliefs, and I can't. I just need to find somebody and groups that are doing things that I know could make the world better.
And directionally, that's what he is trying to do, and he recognizes that of the two campaigns, there's one that is more entertaining to what he has, and that's what it become a big top a big top of different ideas, but that are all American ideals to get us healthy again. So
and here's one thing he just said. I'll just say FDA. It's USDA. That's the other letters that I couldn't remember. 75% of the FDA funding doesn't come from taxpayers. It comes from pharma. Yes. And pharma executives and consultants and lobbyists cycle in and out of these agencies. With President Trump's backing, I'm going to change that. We're going to staff these agencies with honest scientists and doctors who are free from industry funding. We're going to make sure the decisions of consumers, doctors, and patients are informed and unbiased science. A sick child is the best thing for the pharmaceutical industry because it's a lifelong client. I added the lifelong client part. When American children and adults are sick with chronic condition, they're put on medication for their entire life.
Yep.
And man, all of a sudden I was like, he's a chiropractor. He's speaking our language.
But he's speaking our language. And, the big thing that is going on right now, we've talked a little bit about Ozempic, but it is this classification of drugs that helps you lose a bunch of body weight fast.
Yes.
That's, great. It's $1,000 a month for the insurance companies to pay, because you're not going to afford that out of pocket. And people are getting sick. People are having, I think I heard one person was vomiting, I want to say.
Oh yeah. Some people are, their digestive tract just shuts down and then no longer moves.
Yeah. And the worst part is it is not a fix. It is literally a Band-Aid. Yes, you will lose the weight. And as soon as you come off it, the weight comes back on.
Because all the gross food that is still, you could make some changes. I'm not saying that there aren't people that are making changes. They absolutely can. But people are not, a lot of them, it's just an instant fix type thing. Yeah. It's over the course of 6 months, they get into their ideal body weight. They're excited. And then they're like, and now back to normal. And normal is gaining a whole bunch of fat back.
And the crazy thing is the mass loss includes muscle mass. And if you did it through normal, natural means of exercising, walking, and calorie cutting, and we're only talking maybe a couple hundred calories a day. We're not talking massive, famine here. You get the same results. It's not that much better than, it's not significantly better, and it doesn't keep the weight off at the end. So it's a problem. It's a major problem. We've talked about that in the past before. What else you got on RFK before we?
What I wanted to, a good transition here is actually what he was talking about. He named a few people, and it was Callie. What's the other one's name? They're sisters, Casey and Callie.
Yes.
And he named them in
Because I think
in his speech.
Callie has been on his team for a while.
Yeah, Callie's been on his campaign, and it's because she's so knowledgeable about this stuff. Sorry, he's so knowledgeable about this stuff.
Yeah.
And let's see, Callie Casey, hold on, bringing it up. I'm looking at what he mentioned.
So basically,
yeah, but he mentioned that there's to listen to this podcast.
Yeah. And this is honestly, Tucker Carlson has been hitting it out of the park with his podcast lately. This one is great.
And what's the name of that? You sent it to me. What's the name of the podcast?
It's just the Tucker. It's the Tucker.
No, the name so
podcast.
that people can look up the
Callie and Casey Means. MEANS.
There we go. The truth about Ozempic, the pill, and how.
Because so Callie and Casey are siblings. They are, they were raised to be critical of things. They were raised to ask questions. It's a really good podcast. The clips on the internet that I came across early on seemed weird, and I think they cut them weird, as if they were talking over the two siblings were talking over each other. They weren't. They were both going at it. Casey, she's the one with the better understanding of not academics as much as she understood the sciences better. Callie she's the doctor.
She's the medical doctor. And then Callie's been political. And what else does he do?
I think he's got an MBA. And
okay.
These kids are both. No, I think Casey went to not Stanford. Was it Stanford?
Mm-hmm. I'm
looking at and then I want to say he went to Harvard or something like that. Anyways, he's got a business degree, MBA. He was working for Coca-Cola. He's worked for some of these big food companies. She was going down. I can't remember her specialty off the top of my head, but as she's going down, she realized a couple of things. One, that medicine is so fractured across all these specializations that they don't see, when one doctor sees a problem, it doesn't get communicated to the other doctor. So there seems to be a disconnect between someone saying, well, your kidney is over here and your heart is over here, and they have nothing to do with each other, except for we know that they do. And there are only a handful of doctors who are cardiac and nephrology. So it's crazy that those disconnects exist, but they do because, people have become more and more specialized, and thank God for specializations, because there are some people. I was talking with a patient of mine who's their soon-to-be child is having all sorts of weird stuff, and St. Louis has one of the top 2 people in the country that know how to deal with this, situation. They basically, the doctor told him and his wife, the next 3 months are going to be hell. And then when the baby's born, the next 3 months after that are going to be hell, because you're going to be, if child's going to be in the NICU, there's going to be like 3 surgeries right off the bat. Or right off, within the first couple of weeks to fix, the problem. Not a genetic thing, just one of these weird things that sometimes happens. But
there's a lot of weird things that are sometimes happening, by the way. But
yes,
we won't go into that today.
But we talked enough, RFK.
Sometimes stuff before all the crazy shots that we all got in this world, there were bad things that happened. I'm not saying that every single bad thing that happened is because of that, but there sure is a lot more now.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, a lot.
But anyways, getting back to it, there's so many specializations that don't see, that make the body look like it's individual little pieces, and it's not. It's one whole thing with individual structures that are interacting with each other in ways that we still don't appreciate. I saw our good friend Keith Wassong publish something recently that some great brain-gut connection that we've known has been there finally got published and says, hey, this is how it's working. And we've always, and it's been obvious for years, and yet it just gets published in 2023. So there is so much going on with the way the body is supposed to work together. But unfortunately, as Casey realized in the system, as she was going through her residency, she had gotten to a point where you can't spend the time with a patient like you're supposed to. You have 15 minutes tops.
And
to get through with a patient, because you've got another one waiting in the next room, and you've got, in order for not you as a doctor, but your hospital system to be profitable, you've got to get to the next person. And the way they become profitable is not only by certain codes that they bill, but also some medications that sometimes come through their system or get kicked back from, the pharmacy to the doctors.
Yeah. And that's got to stop.
It has to.
And also there's kickbacks from the insurance companies to the doctors for percentage of vaccines given to the kids or the COVID vaccines. There were very lucrative kickbacks given to medical providers for how many people they got vaccinated.
Yeah. And in fact, and you mentioned it, but I want to reiterate it. Childhood pediatric offices really push the childhood vaccines because they get a percentage of their income is coming from the vaccines. And if they hit certain thresholds for the number of patients that they gave vaccines to, they get a bonus.
Which is why if you refuse vaccines in the office, they will kick you out. And I can tell you firsthand that absolutely happens.
Yeah. And and you can say, well, why does my child that has never seen a needle need a Hep V vaccine? The hepatitis.
Sexually transmitted disease.
Right.
Or a drug user disease.
For drug users and prostitutes.
Yeah.
Which they sometimes they cross over. But if they never have that, and if mom's not a prostitute or a drug user.
Try not to.
So, any case.
So on this interview with Tucker, how did Casey and Callie come together to have these conversations? What is their other than being siblings, what is their
they're siblings, and they were always close. They're the only two kids, I believe, as I understand it. Parents were very supportive of them. They were less concerned about the grades as much as they were about exploring ideas. In fact, that was one of the things, I believe that's the way she phrased it. But, they kept on exploring ideas, and, Casey, she's almost done. And when her parents, found out that she was going to be, dropping back because she found they were more interested in them finding the truth than they were in them achieving accolades. And they certainly come from the side of, I want to say, Washington, D.C., Virginia, that entire area. I can't remember where they grew up, where the parents generally are like, well, my child went to Stanford and mine went to Harvard and mine is a doctor and mine is a pediatrician. And, it's a lot of that. The parents are like, hey, you find the truth and you set your path and you do your thing. Well, she's about $500,000 in debt with all of her education. And she realizes that entire path is going to drive her to working for a hospital system that will effectively pay for all her student loans off, will give her a nice income, bonuses, et cetera, et cetera. And she realized that she was not going to be able to help people. She was not going to be in, and this is not something new. I've heard several medical doctors going through this. Sean Baker, who is one of the leaders in the carnivore group, I think his company is Rivero, where he's trying to do research showing that people on a carnivore diet actually reverse a lot of their chronic diseases very quickly.
Which is because you're eating zero processed food at that point.
Right. Exactly.
Zero processed food.
And for him, he was an orthopedic surgeon, where he was having these patients come in before they needed a surgery, but clearly they were going that direction. And he's like, what's your diet? How do we fix your diet so that your diabetes isn't such a problem, so that your weight goes away? We've talked about my weight vest, haven't we?
I don't remember.
All right.
I don't listen to most of the things you say, so.
I know. I get that. So I get a weight vest about a month or two back. I love wearing it for a walk. This week, and half the reason I need to have you check me tomorrow when we visit is because I've been walking and my low back is just like, ooh, I don't like that. Something is not as balanced as it should be, which suggests I'm out of balance. But, I'm only adding an extra 30 pounds to my frame, currently sitting at 195. I jump up, just call it 230 for easy math. That's a lot of weight on a frame that's not used to that. And the reality is, just because you are bigger around doesn't mean your skeleton got bigger. Yeah. It's still the same size as a normal adult. They don't get wider. And that can
not
cause
just big boned. You're saying that whole thing when people say they're big boned, it's not true.
They're not.
They're not.
Sorry.
I've seen the MRIs. You're not big boned.
No.
You could be tall, but again, you're not big boned.
So they'd come in and see Dr. Baker, and he'd be like, you're going to have this problem. So if we fix this hip, that knee is going, and then that hip and that one, you've got to make the lifestyle changes. And he had to get, he was basically run out, almost lost his license. He was brought before the board because he was basically trying to fix people opposed to like fix them through diet and exercise, opposed to, well, you're here and the insurance will pay for a new knee. So other doctors have gone in before that. I'm excited to hear the means are trying to, be a little bit more vocal and a little bit more in mainstream at this point. But it is really curious because, she's going through all this stuff. They were talking about seed oils and the food pyramid, which we've talked about in the past. I think at one point in time, he points out, yeah, I know it's a food plate, but it doesn't matter, that they would emphasize all these carbs, grains, starches, all of which can convert immediately to sugar in the body. And then when you get that, if you prioritize from the bottom of the pyramid up, because the pyramid builds upon itself, before you even got to a protein, you would have 12 servings of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And that's
what we learned. That's what we learned was the correct way when we were kids. The food pyramid was all over the walls at public school.
It was
talking about how you had to eat your whole grains and your cereals and your rices and your breads. And that's how you become healthy. And everyone got sick.
Yep. And in fact, I was chatting with a young lady today. I told her, because she was going to talk to a nutritionist about something. And I'm just like, just remember, the first thing you should do is prioritize your protein and get at least 100 grams a day. And that's not enough. So
you never know when you're walking into a nutritionist's office if they're going to be an actual nutritionist or a medical minded one. Because if they're medical minded, if you're diabetic, they're going to be like, well, you got to have your whole grain. And I'm like, if you're diabetic, you could live without ever eating a whole grain again.
Pretty much.
And be totally fine.
Pretty much.
Maybe not even have to take pills anymore.
In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but my wife, Jean, was thinking really hard as we were running the practice. She was getting into all the nutrition stuff, and she sort of wanted to do sort of a nutrition style thing. So she's like, well, I'll go get the certification. And, she found a couple things that were online, but all of them, in order for you to be certified and to go through the entire program, you have to do what, is currently the government standards, which are complete garbage. And they're crap. So she opted not to bother.
No, it's not worth it. It's silly. Yeah. I know my a friend of mine, her husband was diagnosed with diabetes, and so they went to the nutritionist through medical things, hoping that it would help. And honestly, he has dropped some weight, not using Ozempic, and he's done some amazing things, just cutting carbs down. He knew that himself. But one thing she said, she asked, because he tends to drink too much beer. And she said she's like, what about beer? And she goes, well, actually, alcohol will lower your blood sugar. And I was like, no. She said, what? And okay, so then I looked it up. And as you're drinking alcohol, there is a drop that happens, but it doesn't last. And it's a pork chop in every can of beer.
It is. It absolutely is.
All of a sudden, it just opened up his brain like, well, I can still have my beer. And so he still drinks too much beer. And it's the little things that come out of people's mouths like that, because she's in a place of authority, right? Yeah. That she's telling them how to solve the diabetes problem.
Yeah, which is only going to make it worse.
Oh, it's going to make it so much worse. So that's the kind of stuff that we still joke about it. We're like, well, drink a beer and keep our blood sugar low.
Yeah. So any case, we could go on and on, but that's not the direction to go. I'm going to hit some other stuff that they were talking about. We talked about the co-optation of the of big pharma and how the food industry, big pharma, and all the regulation agencies are basically, circling the wagons, and they just run around
each other's back.
They really do.
I'll scratch. And I mean, it's just a giant orgy. It's disgusting.
It really is. And it's the worst kind. It's a ball of snakes. Yeah, they actually, and this was interesting because, Tucker pointed out, you can't address this topic at all because, if you even bring it up, you are wrong. But he basically, they brought up the birth control pill as having issues and side effects. And I think we've talked about this in the past, but it leads, there are links of the birth control pill to dementia and other health issues. But there are also some questions. I had, the same couple that was in here earlier that I was talking about earlier that have the real major problem with their baby. He said to me, because they've been together for over a decade, longer than that, I think 15 years, but they're 39 and 40 now, trying to have a baby for the first time. If he had to do it over again, he said he would have done it back when we were 26, 27, because we are pretending that taking this birth control is, maybe it's a short-term thing for some people. Maybe they need a little bit of it to sort of help figure out stuff. But when you use it as a means to say, well, I'm going to get ahead in this world, I'm going to do my thing.
Yeah.
When there was a short window in the first place to be able to produce a child, then we need to start asking different questions. And
the fact that we as Americans can't afford to have children in our 20s.
Yes.
Because everything is so expensive. And
and it's worse now.
Childcare is ridiculous. It's very frustrating because I get why people are waiting until their 30s or 40s to have kids, but a lot of times
have enough money.
Too late. It's too late.
And it's only gotten worse now because of the way the inflation has been going, where you can't even afford groceries for the month because the money runs out before the month does. So, but there was a second thing that was interesting that Casey mentioned. She's a young lady who is, she's got her career ahead of her. She's working towards her career. And I commend her for choosing that path, but it was so bad that she doesn't even know how to cook for herself, much less somebody else, that she felt that was beneath her to learn how to cook because she's going to be a doctor. And she realized how stupid that idea was, because all of us need to eat and we should all know how to make a meal. I don't care if you're male or female. You should be able to figure out how to cook something up, even if you don't have a fancy grill and a brisket.
Don't say brisket. I am really hungry. I am angry at you for saying that.
I had to. But yeah,
so
no,
good.
that was
like the fact that people don't know how to cook. They don't know how to make an egg, right?
Yeah.
How to cook an egg.
Okay, now let's back up. Cooking eggs are really difficult. When you get right down to it, you will screw up more eggs cooking them than you think.
Yeah, but you can also eat everything you screw up.
This is true. I suppose that is true. But no, in all fairness, you should know how to cook something. And eggs are easy because they should be cheap.
They should be.
And you could play with, you could play around with some cheap eggs to figure out what you like, throw away the stuff you don't, and then go buy some good eggs and make that all the time. And that's what I do.
Yes. So when we complain about the cost of food, one of the things we need to realize is if we focus on real food, which is expensive, but you don't need so much of it. We don't need all the crap. You don't need all the stuff in the center aisles. You could focus on eggs and fish and meat. And if you're cooking it yourself and not going to a restaurant and eating it, it is a lot more affordable.
I'm just trying to do some math in my head, but my 6 eggs and bacon. I'm out of coleslaw.
Oh man, I'm hungry.
I know. But my 6 eggs and bacon.
So half a dozen eggs and bacon. That's usually your dinner, or was that your breakfast?
That's dinner. But I could do that 2 meals a day. I mean, I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would fill me up for a day. Let's say that your carton of eggs is $4. So half a dozen is $2. And if you get good
if you're buying
bacon,
the cheap eggs, you're buying the cheap eggs.
huh?
If you're buying the cheap eggs.
I'm not, but I
know, but you're saying it's for people. Like you could buy
you could buy cheaper eggs. Yeah, but I'm just using this as an example.
I'm just saying in St. Louis for the good eggs, it's more like $7 a carton.
Well, go find a farmer who's got.
Well, actually,
chickens.
some of my patients, I got eggs today from my patients.
So. But then, so let's say $2 to $3 for your eggs, and then I'm getting really good bacon, but it's bacon ends, so I've got a really good price point on that. But let's say you're getting the higher end bacon. Let's just call it $10 a pound, and let's do a quarter of that, which is 4 ounces, which is normally what I dice up and throw in there. So we're at $2.50, and let's call it $3.50 for your $7 eggs. We're right there at $6
for one meal.
That's
full of nutrients and all of the fat and food and protein you would need for that.
Exactly. Meal. And vitamins. I was chatting with on a group of guys asking, hey, what helps you give you a lift when you're feeling down, and what supplements you're using? I'm like, guys, use eggs, because if you eat 4 to 6 eggs, you will feel amazing. In fact, your workouts
and stay hydrated too.
Stay hydrated too. But I was just starting. They're like, what supplements do you need, and what do you guys like? And they threw out a bunch of stuff. All the male hormone enhancing stuff. That sort of give you that pump and make you feel better. But nothing like an egg. In fact, I still remember Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body. When that book came out, he had a recipe in there that was called the Salmonella Shake. That was 4 eggs, raw. Well, the whole thing was raw. You'd use raw milk, almond butter, and chia seeds. And you drink one of those, and wow, the amount of energy you would have. It was like taking steroids, is what he described it as. And sure enough, I did a double one day, and sure enough, I was 10 pounds heavier the next day. Just like steroids and retaining water. No, but it should not.
Food does not have to be expensive.
But that $6 meal that I just described, if you needed chips, your bag of chips is at least $6.
Yep.
Or if not $4. So that's money that you're not going to get any good calories and nutrition out of. I'm sorry. You're just not.
Even if you bought the organic chip, still trash.
Yeah,
it's less trash, but it's still trash. It's not something that your body needs. And I'm not saying I never eat a chip, so I'm not going to be like that person who says I never eat a chip. I absolutely can eat a chip, but that's not part of my everyday meal planning. That's not what I don't typically buy it very often.
Right. We just need to figure out how to do this, because unfortunately, not only, we're slowly seeing an erosion of our food supply, with pushes to saying, oh, let's make a fake meat because that's better for the environment. And yet there's no evidence that it's worse for the environment. And in fact, any sort of factory plant is probably worse for the environment. They're just buying all the carbon credits that you haven't realized you will eventually need just to survive in the world.
We got to stop this. And y'all, if you haven't, we both recommend that you guys look up the full, we've talked about it, but look up the full interview with Tucker Carlson, and then also look up the total speech from RFK Jr.
Well, and on top of that, RFK was on Tucker's podcast this past Monday, I believe, is when that one released. And that one's a very good podcast too, because they're straightforward, they're having fun.
It was actually a really interesting one to listen to, just because it was interesting to hear them talk about.
But it's interesting to listen to Tucker. Like I said, Tucker is hitting it out of the park on his interviews. They're 2-hour interviews. They're 1 to 2 hour interviews. They're really in depth. They're having fun, and they're people that you have not heard elsewhere. So I would highly recommend listening to them. My favorite part of the RFK interview with Tucker was, if he lets you be the
CIA, was it the CIA?
The CIA, yes. Would you say would you run the CIA? And he's like, I would love to, but the Senate wouldn't let me through because there's enough people in the CIA who have people on the committees that would sort of shut that down before
never confirm it. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother problem that they need to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be an uphill battle, but I'm excited to see what's going to happen.
It's going to be curious. The other funny thing in that interview was, especially when they were talking about getting back to some of the lawfare, when New York was giving him grief about not being an actual having a New York residence, that he's spending too much time in California where his wife lives. He went down the list of the licenses and stuff that he maintains in New York City, along with a home and everything else. And he's going down, his law licenses from New York. He's only had a law license in New York. His driver's license is there. He pays property taxes there. He pays income tax there. He has his hunting and fishing license there. And that's when Tucker interrupted and said, those are the important ones.
Tucker loves to fish.
And I don't blame him, because I'm looking forward to hunting season. This will come out right before hunting season starts up. So I'm looking forward to that.
Fun.
So,
well, do we want to go over anything else, or do you think we can wrap it?
I think those are the big ones, folks. I highly encourage you to listen to these two podcasts. If you're like, hey, I don't want to get political, great. Both of these are not political. They are saying, hey, what will drive the country into a better place? And that's sort of why I like these. It wasn't, it's asking the questions, who can solve these problems? And quite honestly, they're not going to get solved otherwise. I mean, it's just that simple.
At least there's a plan. At least they don't know exactly how it's going to go, but at least there's a plan to move forward with some of these problems.
Yeah.
Where I hate to say the other side is just perpetuating the problems.
I don't want to say bread lines, but I said bread lines.
Bread lines. I don't want to eat bread like that. Can we have bacon lines? Bacon lines.
Wouldn't that be grand? But in any case, Dr. Bagley, where can they find you?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm on the west side. You can find me at Precision Chiropractic, STL for St. Louis.com.
And I'm in Springfield, Illinois, Keystone Chiro SPI, as in Springfield.com. And find us on all the socials. Make sure you like, subscribe, especially give us a 5-star review. Heck, give us a 1-star review. If you really hate
us,
that we're on the bubble of being political. We're trying not to be, but we sort of like freedom.
I kind of do.
And we come from a profession that has been oppressed, and we've seen the bad stuff.
We're victims.
We're not victims, but we've seen
what's happened, and still people will say, "Oh, you're a quack." And
yeah,
I'll be like,
exactly.
Yep,
and quite honestly, we help people day in, day out. And again, we don't want to be thrown in jail for just having a conversation, having an idea. If you have a bad idea, air it and have somebody discuss it so we can have better ideas and make the bad ideas just sort of, oh yeah, that was dumb. Let's move on to something smart.
And that's what conversations are about. Podcasts.
Yes.
That's why the alternative media, which is quite amazing, including podcasts, which you're listening to right now, are amazing, because now we can get this information to more people, and there's less censorship with alternative media. Problem is how you can't get it unless you look for it. If you share it.
Yes. So share it wide and far, even if it's not this episode. Find another episode that you're like, this is my favorite episode. I'm going to share it. So, all right, folks, we will be back next week with another episode of The Blonde and the Bald. Have a good one.
Bye.
That's all for today's episode of The Blonde and the Bald. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoyed today's show with Drs. Bagley and Schurger, remember, don't give up and just live with the pain. Come back next week and get more answers and solutions. Visit our websites at KeystoneChiroSPI.com and PrecisionChiropracticSTL.com for more info, and catch all the episodes of The Blonde and the Bald.